Having already discussed the basic selection tools and also the color and contrast based selections, now we can talk about more advanced selection techniques. But let's just first start with another technique which you can use with the Quick Mask tool. Remember, that's the Q option on the keyboard, or clicking on this icon here, which changes the way you look at your selection. But normally what we do is we make a selection and then we switch to this mode. But what I'm going to do here is first press Quick Mask mode and then use the tool we haven't used so far. It's the gradient tool. So this is the one on the toolbar. I'm going to select that, and using the default options with this tool, what you can do is to click and drag on the image and create a gradient. So remember, the red parts are deselected, the original color parts are selected, so we can set up the angle and the distance of the gradient on the selection. So it's almost like feathering our selection. You can see if I just draw a very narrow little line or very short one, it almost creates a perfectly sharp edge on the selection. But the longer I drag this line, the more feathered the edge is going to be. So that's how the gradient works in Quick Mask mode. And why would we ever need this? Well, for example, if I only want to affect the mountains, and let's say I want to add a bit more contrast on the snow to make it a bit more dramatic, I could make a selection from bottom up to shield the bottom details. And maybe I can go even further up, something like that, and maybe even more, something like this. Yep, so the bottom detail, the road and the foreground won't get selected, only the top parts, mainly the snowy areas. So now if I press Q to go back to the selection, we can then use an adjustment. And from the image adjustments menu, I'm going to choose levels, which is a brilliant adjustment for increasing contrast in an image. So I'm going to select that. And here all I need to do is to drag the left arrow, this black one, to further to the right, and the white one further down. These are representing the black point and the white point in the images, so the darkest and the brightest details. So this means actually that when the extreme tonal values get closer to each other, then all the rest of the colors will also increase in contrast. But don't worry about the technical background of this, because to be able to understand levels, we will have to talk about the histogram, and I'm going to deal with that in a separate video. But for now, let's just check before and after by turning the preview on and off, and we can see what we achieved. So that was before, and this is after. And you can see that the bottom details are not changing, and I can even emphasize this a bit more, so just exaggerate the effect, and then click OK, and deselect, just to see how it looks. And because of our feathered or gradient selection, we won't be able to see a clear edge where the effect was applied and where it wasn't. So thanks to that long feathered selection, it looks perfect. So that was before, and this is after. Once again, before and after. So that's a useful technique. But let's switch to another image now, and let me show you another great selection technique. Unfortunately, this is only available in Photoshop Creative Cloud, so if you have earlier versions, you won't find this option. It's under Select, and there is the Focus Area option. With this, you can use the details in the image which are in focus, and Photoshop will automatically detect those and automatically deselect anything that's not in focus. So in this case, again, it did a really good job because the background was out of focus, so it was blurry. It automatically managed to filter those details out. But then if it still kept some details which we don't need, like the pavement in this case, we can switch to the minus brush, which is the focus area subtract tool, and with that just paint over the foreground, and it should automatically remove these details. And once we have that, I can see that a bit of the shoe is missing, so I'm going to switch to the plus arrow. So I'm just going to draw over the shoe detail there, and it should automatically add that, and it added a bit of shadow as well, which is fine. I'm not worried about that. But we also miss a bit of the jacket, so I'm just going to paint over that too. So there you go. quickly we managed to create a really good selection, and then we can take this further. So I can click on OK, and we can see our selection, and we would be able to just keep on working with this. But there is also another brilliant feature called Refine Selection. Now, to be able to access that, you can either go back to the Select menu and then choose Refine Edge, or if you have any of the selection tools highlighted, you will get the Refine Edge option here in the options bar. Now, once you click on that, this will take you into a completely new dialog box with a lot of options in it, in which first of all you can change the view. So instead of seeing the marching ants, we can choose the quick mask view with that overlay, or we can choose to have a black background, white background, or see it with transparency, or just simply see it without any selection around it. Well, that doesn't really help much. So I'm going to switch to on white. I think in this case that works really well, and I can zoom closer to the image, and I'm particularly interested in the hair detail in this case. Of course, all the other details are important, but this is always the most complicated part, the hair, in case you are selecting a person. So the way we normally talk about the edges is that we call the hair soft edge, while we call all the other edges like clothes hard edges. Objects tend to have hard edges, anything that has a clean cut, while soft edges are like hair, grass, fur, which is always more complicated to select. So the Refine Edge dialog box gives you a way to separate these two types of edges by using the Refine Radius tool. Once you select that, this is actually a brush, so we can change the size of it, and then paint over around the hair, and that will improve the selection on the hair. So you can see we have already a better selection, and if we feel like there's a couple of bits that we don't need, we can alt-click to remove those parts from the selection. So if I feel like there's a little bit too much selected on this part and there, we can remove those. But you can see how much better already our selection looks on the hair. So this tool really improved the selection. But then we can also make adjustments to the edge. So we can use smooth edge, for example, which normally works. If you don't increase it too far up, it actually helps to refine the edge slightly. You can also add a bit of contrast. And then there's also loads of other options here like feather, shift edge, and even decontaminate colors. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on this because this is a big topic, selecting people especially. And because it's a complicated and big topic, I have a separate course about selecting people. So specifically all the techniques you need to be able to make good selections on people. But one of the key techniques is definitely the Refine Edge option. Now, I'm quite happy with my selection, so I'm just going to click on OK. And you can see this actually still didn't make any difference on the image. It's still just adjusting the selection. So I can show you all around the image. We have quite a good selection. There's only a little bit here which remained from the background, but we can always combine selection tools. Remember, let's say using the magic wand, holding down the Alt key, I can click on that part there to quickly remove it. And if I see some details which should be in the selection, I can select the rectangular marquee tool, for example, shift click and add these to the selection. Always remember to combine selection tools and go close and check the selection before you apply it. Now, of course, we could extract the boy from the background and place it onto another image like we did it in the previous examples. But let's say I'm not sure what I want to do with this selection yet. I might want to move him, or maybe I just want to adjust the area on the image where the boy is. So if you are not sure, or you think you might need the selection later, you can actually save it. And that's what I'm going to show you. It's under the Select menu, and it's called Save Selection. So once I click on that, I can call this boy walking, for example, and then I'm going to click OK. So when a selection gets saved, I can be sure that I can recover it. So I can go to deselect from the Select menu. And the place where you can find your selections is actually in the Channels panel, which should be next to your Layers panel. So if you click on that, you will find a black and white channel at the bottom. So I can click on this and I can see my selection with both the hard edges and the soft edges on the top. So this is when it starts to make more sense, these terms. And this is, by the way, called the mask view. So I can switch between the RGB mode and the channel with our selection. But I can also see other options here, like red, green, and blue. These are the 3 channels that the RGB color mode uses, and they show the intensity of each of these primary colors. Now, actually, these can also be used to improve your selections, because you can see on each of these channels, the outline will look slightly different. For example, on the red channel, we have hardly any difference between the boys' skin tones and the background, while if I switch to green or especially blue, we will have much more difference there. And even selecting the hair from the blue channel is usually easier. Of course, it depends on the background and the hair color as well, but you can see the blue channel will give us the highest contrast between the boy's head and the background. And we will take advantage of this in the next example. But for now, all I wanted to show you is that we have our selection saved as a channel. And to be able to load it back, you can either command click or control click on the channel's thumbnail, which will load the selection back, or we can of course go to the select menu and choose load selection, and then we can choose which one we want, and we can click OK, and that will be loaded just as the way we saved it. So now that we know all these different ways of making selections, in the next example, which will be our last video about selections, I'm going to put almost everything together in one example, and we will select that girl from the background. So you can see there's a lot of things here. We have hard edges, soft edges, and the background is quite complex. Although it's out of focus, it might not work perfectly with the focus area selection. So we will actually combine several different methods in that example.